sir.
Let's go.
Fine, sir.
Introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nivranshu Hans. I come from Jammu district. I completed my schooling from Kendriya Vidyalaya Gandhinagar, Jammu, and after that I went for computer science engineering from NIT Srinagar. I got placed in Infosys company after that. I worked there for roughly 7 months, and after that I went for MBA from IIM Indore. I mostly studied human resources, IT systems management and marketing based subject, and I got placed in General Electric company. I worked there for roughly 2 years, and after that I left the job and decided to sit for civil services, which brings me here. And personally, I love to read. I read Russian prose mostly, and I also play guitar.
What made you shift to civil services?
So I think I was at that point in my career where I had to make a conscious decision where I want to work for the rest of my life. And in terms of drive and motivation, I realized money is not something which is driving me at the moment. And challenging task and people management was something that was really a motivational force for me. And I thought that if I could get an opportunity to work for my own people, I think I would be more fulfilled.
That internal motivation was not there initially. So that's why you went for engineering.
So initially, learning new things, something which I cannot learn at my home state, was big motivation, and it still is. But when I worked, when I got rewarded, when I got awarded for it, I realized that learning is now something which I can do it on my own. And challenging task was something that I thought in terms of learning and experiential learning would be much better fit for me, and that made me choose civil
What are the qualities that you have that would be fit for being a civil servant?
For being a civil servant. So personally, I feel drive is something that is that's something that I have, because I was able to take multiple projects at the same time and accomplish them to good fulfillment in my workforce. Second thing is problem solving, which I have encountered. I wrote a paper on genetic algorithms. It got published in an international journal. I solved a very unique problem there. So problem solving is something. And then I think people management, because I have been part of multiple committees and first organized throughout college. So people management is another thing that I would.
One more thing, there are certain countries where civil services are kind of abolished, they are not there. Do you think civil services needs to be abolished in India also, or you think civil servants should be there?
I think the civil services, I believe civil services is the only way where you can directly impact grassroots in a benevolent manner. Because there is a famous business author, not business author, economist, his name was Milton Friedman. He said the only business of the business is to make profit, right? So if a profit-driven entity is there, you can't expect it to be benevolent, to be socially conscious. That's where civil services comes in.
And you think that there are certain elections, like normally we have random elections happening, so
Right.
We are always in an election mode. Don't you think there should be one-time election should happen all over the country?
So, sir,
its benefit and negative aspects.
All right, sir. Sir, from my memory, we used to have simultaneous elections before 1965, right? And unfortunately, not even unfortunately, it was the vision of constitutional designers that we have articles like governor's rule and Upsc Act and President's rule, national emergency. And as long as these provisions are there, which are very necessary provision in some regard, simultaneous election will not be a possibility. Besides that, I have seen that certain regional parties which do not have as much muscle powers as the national parties, they cannot compete with them at an equal footing at the same time, right? So having regular election definitely creates lethargy, it creates deadlocks, it creates model code of conduct, and because of that, a lot of the important decision-making tasks are not accomplished, but at the same time, it performs this representative democracy implementation, which is very necessary. So I think right now it is good. Thank you, sir.
There is ongoing friction between government and judiciary on judicial appointment.
Yes.
What is this?
So the judicial appointment is done through collegium system, which evolved through 3 judges' cases, and then the executive has an issue with it because of the NJAC, which came with 99 constitutional amendment. And the whole issue majorly revolves around the opacity of collegium system, because it happens in closed doors and executive is not allowed, and after 2 repeated recommendations, the executive has to appoint the SC governor. So there are positives and benefit also, but right.
What is the composition of NJAC?
NJAC. So NJAC had the composition was very vague. It had a representative from the judiciary and eminent persons as a representative of executive. So eminent person is a very wide, what should I say, wide canvas. Anyone can come. All in all, it was a 6-member panel, and 2 was the veto for any decision making, right? And 2 was the number of eminent person from executive. So at the end of the day, it could be said that NJAC was prone to veto from executive.
So what was the ground that NJAC was quashed? What the reasons Supreme Court?
Separation of power being first, then basic structure of constitution being second, because judiciary at the end of the day is part of the basic structure, as repeatedly iterated through Keshav Nanda Bharti case and many other cases. So these were the 2 predominant points.
So can we say that basic doctrine is a kind of encroachment in the legislature, into the domain of legislations?
So basic, can you please repeat the question, sir?
Can we say basic structure or basic doctrine is an encroachment into the domain of legislations?
So at the end of the day, we do need to have a balance, right? So if we talk about encroachment into legislature, there are already many other provisions in constitution which can qualify, right? For example, office of governor can be argued. And then at the same time, Article 121, 122, which separates them directly, can be, you can argue that there is an encroachment because the legislature should have power because it's a representative of people. But at the same time, we have to have a balance, because judicial function is something which is highly specialized. In legislature, people from all backgrounds, all educational, economic, social background come. We say that democracy is people by is a government by the mediocres. Why? Because we don't have specialized manforce there. But judiciary is something where we need a person who has very in-depth knowledge of law and all the constitution, right? So
can you name few basic doctrine?
Basic doctrines.
Can you name few?
Yes, sir. Doctrine of colorable legislature being one. When you try to design a legislature which tries to accomplish something which is not directly applicable. Doctrine of basic structure is another, where you cannot amend the soul of the constitution or the basic point. Then there is a doctrine of separation of power, which aims to create a separation between different organs of government. Then there is a doctrine of pith and substance, where you see that the authority or the body which is actually making a law, does it have actual authority, and
Tell me the brief history of civil services in India.
Civil services in India. So civil services in India, as far as I can see, was predominantly developed by the Britishers. There were many different initiatives that were taken by different viceroys and governors. For example, the Cornwallis Code, which came in, which has been known to be the father of Indian police service in India. Then there were initiatives by Lord Bentinck for financial decentralization, which can
post-modern development.
Modern development, I would say, sir, developed
especially post-independence.
Post-independence, all right, sir. So for that, I am aware there was a very famous speech by Sardar Patel, who said that civil service is the steel frame of India, right? And with that, major institution like Lal Bahadur Shastri's Academy for police services and civil services, and Sardar Patel Academy for police services came in. So I can say that from 1950 to 60, civil services, majorly from police and civil, was already in place, and foreign services, I believe, would spearheaded predominantly by 1970s when Sushma Swaraj Institute came in. These were the institutional.
What do you understand by UCC?
US?
UCC, that is very news nowadays.
Uniform Civil Code. So Uniform Civil Code aims to establish a common doctrine of law when it comes to civil procedures, for instance, marriage, property, and other associated. And if we go into the constitution, the designers during the debate put deliberately Uniform Civil Code as Article 44 in directive principle.
Do you favor imposition of UCC?
So in certain
Personal
respect, I do favor, but there are other issues also. For instance, when it comes to civil law, if we have a common law, catching criminals would be easy because a lot of the time we see criminals commit acts of crime in one state and then migrate to some other to evade law because there are the laws are very
In
good.
criminal
But when
sense, we
it
have
comes,
already uniform law.
I'm sorry.
In criminal sense, we have already criminal or this uniform law. We
That's
are
what
only
I'm
talking
saying. That's
civil
what I'm
affairs.
saying. When it comes to that, but when it comes to property, when it comes to marriage, we see that the same thing is not there, and which leads to many issues. For example, the Hindu Marriage Code and the Special Marriage Act. Right. A lot of the time, a lot of the judgments, for instance, the Hurra judgment says that people marrying just for the sake of marrying from a special marriage act does not hold water, and that directly says that if there is a law which can be loopholed, which can be taken advantage of, that's not right.
So are you only talking of uniform civil code or the process of implementation has already begun?
So to some extent, it has begun to some extent. For
Any such
instance,
example?
the Special Marriage Act itself, so any person from any religion can.
What do you
get
understand by this Akhand Bharat?
Akhand Bharat. Alright, so Akhand Bharat as an idea comes from the ancient Indian subcontinent ideal, where we see that all the neighboring countries from India, such as Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, even Afghanistan, have had a same history. We look alike, we have same genetics, and we have had a same history from the times of ruler Kanishka to Ashoka to Gupta dynasty to even Cholas, right? So Akhand Bharat aims to revive that type of camaraderie, that type of cohesion, that type of same identity, which used to be there.
What is cloud computing?
So cloud computing is a form of, thank you so much for the question. So cloud computing is a new age of computing per se. Normally computing used to happen at the node. Node is the end laptop or phone or your maybe a computer system, right? But cloud computing takes sometimes the storage and sometimes the processing at the end server. The server, it could be anywhere, it could be in Jammu, it could be in Punjab, the server where the data storage and processing power is. The server will take the data, process and then send to the endpoint, like your phone. For instance, when you open Google Drive, you may think that Google Drive, or maybe if you open Gmail, you might think that whatever email attachments you have is in your phone. It's not, it's a copy, but the actual data is in Google server. That could, in India, that is in Gurgaon and Bangalore. So that's a type of cloud computing.
What are the basic difference between CAA and NRC?
Citizenship Amendment Act and National Register of Citizens, right? So, National Register of Citizenship was the precursor for CAA. It was an exercise where government tried to identify all the living residents of country, and the idea to identify was whether you've been living or residing in this place for the past 6 months. Whoever was residing in a place for past 6 months would try to add it into a national register so that we could at least have a count of how many people are there in India. That would help in designing all the schemes and all, right? Citizenship Amendment Act was another attempt at the same direction where we try to identify who are actually the citizens of India first, and second, the persecuted minorities of neighboring countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, who can be given citizenship, and the cutoff for that was 2007. So if you're a persecuted minority and you've come to India after 2007 and you've been staying here since 2007, you could be granted citizenship.
You heard about inflation?
Yes, sir.
Please define inflation.
So inflation in economic terms could be defined as a continued rise of prices in an economy. So that's inflation, and in India we track inflation through two metrics predominantly, one being the wholesale price index and the other one being consumer price index. CPI is the inflation targeted under Inflation Act by RBI.
How to control inflation as an administrative officer?
So for controlling inflation there are two different types, because inflation is of two different types.
As an administrative officer only.
As an
Administrative officer.
Alright, sir. So cost push inflation is something which as an administrator you cannot, right? Because at the end of the day the products are being built by the companies. You might not have direct control over it. Then there is the other priced demand-based inflation, and that comes into picture when people have more money in hand, right? So I'm thinking of a country where you don't have, where there is free market, where you don't directly impact the prices of goods, but you can directly impact the money supply, right? So as an administrator, if you can increase the interest rates, if you increase the interest rates, the people will first put more money in bank accounts, and second, loans would be reduced. That's what
Increase the interest rate, part of monetary policy, not an
Yes, sir.
administrative key.
So, alright, so maybe
As a Deputy Commissioner of Jammu, how to control inflation?
as an
As
administrator.
a Deputy Commissioner of Jammu.
Alright, so personally, whatever I
What are the
have
steps
as a
taken by
district
you?
administrator, I would be controller of the schemes, right? Subsidies, that would be in my
Very
hand.
good.
So if I reduce that, the money supply would get reduced. People will have less money in hands. If people, all of them will have less money in hand, demand would reduce. So through that, I would be able to control inflation.
What about MNCs?
Multinational companies.
Please define MNC.
So MNC is a multinational company. It's a corporate entity which has operation in multiple geographies, sometimes across continents, sometimes across countries. For instance, Pepsi is a company, MNC. General Electric is an MNC. Tata is an MNC.
What is the difference between FDI and FII?
So FDI is foreign direct investment. FII is foreign institutional investment. So as per the norms,
And FPI?
foreign portfolio investment.
Basic difference between FII and FPI?
So basic difference.
FII and FPI.
So I'm not sure I'm able to recall FPI and FII because both of them more or less fall in the same bracket if we compare it from FDI. So I'm not sure of the exact difference.
What is the difference between instrument of accession and instrument of instructions?
Instrument of accession and instrument of instructions. Alright, so instrument of instruction is something which I can recall from Government of India Act. The modern day avatar of instrument of instruction comes in form of directive principle of state policy, where you try to tell legislative and executive and judiciary how to rule, how to do the civil governance. Instrument of accession is a legal agreement between two different sovereigns, wherein one sovereign agrees to submit to the authority of the other. For instance, Jammu Kashmir Succession Act.
What should be the traits of civil servant as per Max Weber?
Max Weber. So Max Weber, as a sociologist, he gave a very hierarchical and a very formalistic view of civil services, where he said that instead of specialized, a generalist is more qualified to be a civil servant. Instead of flat design, a hierarchical mentality is more suited for civil servant. And third, problem solving is something.
Tell me one special quality of yours that may convince us that you are a very fit candidate for this post.
So I think
Just one quality.
generalism, sir. I'm a generalist.
So you are a jack of all trades but master of none.
So master of some, but jack of
Master
all.
of some.
Yes, sir.
Master of some, not master of none.
Analyze the rule of UPA, 10 years of UPA and now almost 10 years of Modi government, this NDA. How you look at the policies and decisions that have been taken that time now? And does it benefited our country in a whole lot more?
So if we compare from NDA, previous rule and the current government, I think we have been benefited a lot in terms of commerce, in terms of trade, in terms of international relations. But we do, if we are being honest, we do see there is a definite lack of cohesion, of unity, of egalitarianism to some extent when it comes to different religions. So it's a plus and a negative game, but altogether, all in all, I would say we are doing better in terms of growth, in terms of development.
What about the UP, as the initiatives taken by that?
So initiatives I think the initiatives that are rewarding us right now in some way had their genesis in that government. For instance, GST was something that was spearheaded by the government of past. Second thing is geoeconomics. For instance, for the first time we had a cotton-based trade with Pakistan, which is very, very difficult thing to achieve and which is still continuing till now despite the hiccups. And third, I think the international relations, wherein the initiatives that India took in terms of designing the anti-terrorism convention at UN, that being first. And
do you think roles and responsibilities of civil servant has changed now in comparison to 30 years ago?
definitely, sir.
How?
Yes, sir. So right now, the society the ideology, everything is changing at a very rapid pace. For instance, when I was studying computer science engineering, the books that were taught to us were designed merely five years ago. And the books that mechanical students were studying were 2 years old. And the books that their professors had studied from were 30, 60 sometimes years old. So everything was changing very fast, and that's just the education domain. Now if you see, people have different problems when it comes to using internet, when it comes to using government services online. So a civil servant now has a very, very important pressing task of learning these digital technologies, because the end point of service delivery is going on through digital media. So that being first. Second thing, generalism is something which has been there and will be there for on and on, because civil servants are being dealt with multiple and plethora of challenges. And the third point, if I have to say, is the security dynamics, which will always be there. So first and foremost is the digital drivenness.
Nivranshu Hans, no?
Yes, sir.
Please, meaning of Nivranshu Hans.
So Nivranshu Hans. So
Nivranshu
Hans,
means?
So Nivranshu means warmth, metaphorically, and literally it's a derivative of Sanskrit word Nivranshu, which means the hue of moon. Hue of moon, the moon's surrounding hue. And Hans is swan in English.
Swan in English.
Yes.
So tell me historical aspect of Jammu.
So Jammu's history.
Historical aspect only.
Historical aspect of Jammu. I'm sorry, sir, I did not understand the question.
What is the history of Jammu?
History of Jammu. So historically, Jammu has been named Jammu because the king Jambu Lochan established a state, Jambupura, when he saw a Bagh and a Bahu drinking from the same pond together. He thought that this place has a very fertile land where every animal, everyone is in peace, so I would establish a city there. That's where genesis of Jammu happened. And in terms of modern day Jammu and Kashmir,
Who is CM of Himachal Pradesh?
CM of Himachal Pradesh. So recently elections were conducted.
That
And,
you are not aware of.
Who is
I'm sorry, sir,
CM
I'm
of
not able to
Gujarat? Gujarat CM कौन है?
Gujarat CM. I'm sorry, sir, I'm not able to recall.
And LG of Jammu Kashmir?
Mr. Manoj Sinha,
Deputy Commissioner in your area?
Deputy Commissioner of my area. I'm sorry, sir, I'm not able to recall.
Okay. GM of SBI?
Mr. Dinesh GM, General Manager, Mr. Dinesh Kara.
Thank you. You can go.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.